In the complex landscape of video games, we are often doing much more than just having fun. We are participating in sophisticated systems of strategy, decision-making, and social dynamics that mathematicians and economists have studied for decades. Behind every compelling game lies an analytical framework more commonly associated with economics, psychology, and political science, the game theory. In 1944, mathematicians John von Neumann and Oskar Morgenstern published The Theory of Games and Economic Behavior, establishing game theory to model strategic interactions mathematically. Little did they know that decades later their work would provide powerful framework for understanding everything from Fortnite battles to Among Us deceptions. Game theory analyzes strategic decision-making among rational participants. Though initially formulated to study economic behavior, its principles have become instrumental in shaping the strategies behind video game design, from AI programming to reward systems and player motivation. Today, we'll explore how game theory concepts manifest in video games, including zero-sum and non-zero-sum dynamics, Nash equilibrium in competitive balance, prisoner's dilemma scenarios, information asymmetry, mechanism design, iterative games and emergent behavior, and more. By understanding these principles, we gain deeper insight into not just how games work, but why we make the decisions we do while playing them, and why some games keeps us engaged for thousands of hours while others quickly lose their appeal. Before we start, if you enjoyed the videos in this channel, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. It helps immensely. At its core, game theory categorizes an interaction based on how value is distributed. In zero-sum games, one player's gain equally another's loss. The total value remains constant. As economist Thomas Schelling explained in his work The Strategy of Conflict, these situations create fundamentally competitive dynamics where players must directly oppose each other. Traditional fighting games like Street Fighter represents pure zero-sum dynamics. When Ryu wins a match, his opponent necessarily loses. There is no scenario where both wins. This creates psychological dynamics that game designers should carefully consider. Drew Dixon, an editor of Game Church, notes, zero-sum designs naturally escalate tensions and create memorable moments precisely because the stakes feel binary and absolute. This explains why tournament moments like Daigo's legendary parry against Justin Wong remain iconic gaming moments years later. However, many modern games intentionally move away from pure zero-sum dynamics. Non-zero-sum games allows for outcomes where participants can mutually benefit or mutually lose. Game designer Jay McGonigal states non-zero-sum thinking is critical for solving complex global problems, which is why many modern games deliberately incorporate these dynamics. MMORPGs like World of Warcraft create predominantly non-zero-sum scenarios in PvE content, where players cooperate against AI opponents for mutual benefits. Research by Nick Yee from the Quantic Foundry shows that these cooperative experiences fulfill different psychological needs than competitive play, attracting players who might otherwise avoid gaming altogether. Most interesting are mixed motive games that incorporate both dynamics. Battle Royale games like Fortnite create temporary alliances that eventually must dissolve, a phenomenon game theorist Jesper Jules calls negotiable consequences, where players constantly reassess the benefit of cooperation against competition. Despite being traditionally applied to multiplayer or competitive scenarios, game theory significantly influences single-player game design. Designers often embed strategic risk-reward dynamics to shape player decisions, echoing classic game theory scenarios. Take Dark Souls, where players constantly balance the risk of exploration and combat against the reward, loot, experience points, or narrative progression. The uncertainty and risk create a psychological state that mirrors strategic interaction studied in game theory. Similarly, Slay the Spire leverages of payoff matrix structure, where players strategically build decks, weighing immediate rewards against potential long-term vulnerabilities. These mechanics represent players navigating through complex strategic equilibria, mirroring the Nash equilibrium principle, where players seek optimal strategies given their circumstances. In puzzle platformers such as Celeste, strategic decision-making manifests clearly. Players must analyze their skills, the game's difficulty, and the potential reward. This compels players to repeatedly reassess and adjust strategies, effectively illustrating repeated game scenarios analyzed extensively by game theorists. One of game theory's most essential concepts comes from mathematician John Nash, who demonstrated that in any competitive scenario, a set of strategies exists where no player can benefit by changing only their strategy while others keep their unchanged. This Nash equilibrium has profound implications for game balance. Players naturally gravitate towards optimal strategies in fighting games, MOBAs, and other competitive titles, creating what the communities call the meta. Game designer David Sirlin describes this process in Playing to Win, noting that competitive games inevitably evolve towards dominant strategies unless deliberately counterbalanced. This presents a fundamental challenge for game designers. Perfect balance often leads to stagnation, while imbalance can create frustration. According to League of Legends lead designer Mark Merrill, the solution is perfect imbalance, deliberately creating shifting imbalances that keep players adapting rather than settling into a static equilibrium. We can see this in practice through frequent balance patches in games like Overwatch, where developer Blizzard Entertainment intentionally shifts the power of different characters to prevent strategic stagnation. Game researcher Simon Ferrari calls this dynamic balance, a deliberate effort to keep the game from reaching a stable Nash equilibrium. Rock, paper, scissors relationship in character design represents another approach to managing the Nash equilibrium. As game design studies professor Jasper Jewell notes, cyclical dominance patterns create strategic diversity by ensuring no single approach dominates all others. StarCraft's classic Terran beats Zerg, Zerg beats Protoss, Protoss beats Terran relationship exemplifies this approach. No game theory concept has been more fruitfully applied to game design than the prisoner's dilemma. In this scenario, two rational individuals might not cooperate even when it's their mutual best interest. This creates powerful tension between self-interest and group benefit. Social deduction games like Among Us or Werewolf are built entirely around this dynamic. As game designer Jesse Schell explains in The Art of Game Design, the games create trust engines where players must constantly evaluate cooperation against betrayal. The math behind this is fascinating. In a classic prisoner's dilemma, betrayal is the dominant strategy for a single interaction. However, as political scientist Robert Axelrod demonstrates in The Evolution of Cooperation, when interactions are repeated, cooperative strategies like tit for tat often emerge as optimal. We see this in multiplayer survivor games like DayZ, where players must decide whether to cooperate with strangers for mutual benefit or betray them for immediate gain. Game researcher Marcus Carter's studies of DayZ player behavior found that communities naturally develop reputation systems to solve this dilemma, creating consequences for betrayal that extend beyond single interaction. Dark Souls' invasion mechanic represents a particularly elegant implementation of the prisoner's dilemma. As game critic Joseph Anderson notes, From Software created a system where helping others benefit yourself, but at the cost of opening yourself to invasion. A perfect risk-reward scenario that creates memorable social dynamics. These moments stick with us precisely because they engage fundamental social calculations. Psychologist Paul Bloom's research suggests that moral dilemmas activate the same brain regions as real-world ethical discussions, explaining why betrayal moments in games create such powerful emotional responses. Game theory distinguishes between perfect information games, where all players know everything, and imperfect information games where crucial information is hidden. Video game designers deliberately manipulate information access to create specific experiences. Fog of War in strategy games creates controlled information asymmetry. As designer Sid Meier explains, by limiting player information, we force decision-making under uncertainty, which creates both tension and the opportunity for bluffing. StarCraft matches hinge on scouting and deception precisely because information is a resource as valuable as minerals or gas. Information asymmetry is central to horror games. In Rules of Play, game theorists Katie Sellen and Eric Zimmerman note that by giving the monster information the player lacks, games like Alien Isolation create sustainable tension through information economics. The player knows the alien exists but not where it is, creating constant dread through information design. Poker-inspired games like Prominence Poker or Final Fantasy's Triple Triad deliberately incorporate bluffing mechanisms. Behavioral economist Dan Ariely's research shows that successful bluffing in games activates reward centers in the brain similar to the other forms of strategic success, explaining why players find these mechanics satisfying. Perhaps most interestingly, many games combine both perfect and imperfect information elements. In A Theory of Fun, game designer Ralph Koster notes that the tension between what players know and don't know creates a cognitive puzzle that engages problem-solving instincts. This explains why games like Battleship, where players know their ship but not their opponents, have imagined engaging for generations. Artificial intelligence is a direct application area for game theory in video games. Developers frequently integrate game theoretic models to create opponents that simulate human-like decision-making. In tactical games like XCOM or strategy games like Civilization, enemy AI adapts its behavior by predicting player strategies. The AI operates under game theoretic assumptions, optimizing its strategy to anticipate and counter player moves. In stealth games like Metal Gear Solid, AI employs strategic decision-making reacting to player visibility, noise, and behavior patterns. These interactions represent repeated games of strategic anticipation and response. Adaptive AI in Alien Isolation demonstrates strategic unpredictability, consistently analyzing players' behavior and responding with unpredictable patterns. The AI in this game uses informatic asymmetry to its advantage, creating a genuinely frightening experience where players never feel safe. Theoretical frameworks like Minimax theorem, first introduced by von Neumann, are used to develop competitive AI for strategy games such as StarCraft 2, where the AI must evaluate thousands of potential player strategies instantaneously, determining the most strategically sound responses. Mechanism design, sometimes called reverse game theory, focuses on creating rules and incentives that lead participants towards desired behaviors. Game developers are real-world mechanism designers crafting systems that guide players' actions. In-game economies represent sophisticated mechanisms of design. Economist Edward Castronova's pioneering research on virtual economies shows that they follow many of the same principles as real-world markets. When EVE Online hired an actual economist, Dr. Eyjolfur Gudmundsson, to manage their virtual economy, they acknowledged the complexity of these systems. Auction houses in games like World of Warcraft implement various auction mechanisms, from Dutch auction to sealed bid systems, each creating different strategic considerations. Game economist Isaac Knowles notes that auction design significantly impacts both price efficiency and player satisfaction in virtual economies. Reputation system represents another form of mechanism design. As researcher Dimitri Williams demonstrates in his study of EverQuest 2 social networks, reputation mechanisms solve cooperation problems by creating lasting consequences for antisocial behavior. This explains why games from League of Legends to PlayStation's reporting systems implement reputation tracking. Perhaps the most sophisticated mechanism design appears in matchmaking system. According to Microsoft research, Ralph Harbrick, the true skill ranking system developer, effective matchmaking solves the fundamental tension between fair matches and acceptable wait times. By carefully designing how players are matched, developers can significantly impact players' experience without changing in-game content. Game theory informs reward structures significantly, shaping player motivations. Game designers leverage payoff matrices, aligning incentives with players' expectation and risk profiles. Randomized reward systems, like those in loot-based games, mirror principles from game theory related to uncertain payoffs and player decision-making under risk. Uncertainty in reward mechanisms creates stronger player engagement, as intermittent reinforcements leads to deeper player commitment and repeated play. Richard Bartle's seminal work on player psychology in Designing Virtual Worlds describes how player motivation aligns with strategic incentives. Achievers, explorers, socializers, and killers respond uniquely to various reward structures. Game designers actively apply these theories to cultivate diverse player engagement, designing reward systems that encourage specific strategic behavior. Additionally, the battle pass structures found in games like Fortnite use strategic uncertainty. Players weigh guaranteed versus potential rewards, echoing strategic decision-making models explored in game theory literature. Knowledge of strategic manipulation through game theory carries ethical responsibilities. Exploitative mechanics such as pay-to-win and loot boxes draw heavily from game theory principles but raise significant ethical issues. In contrast, ethical applications emphasize transparency, fairness, and player well-being. The responsible use of game theory can optimize mutual player-developer benefits, fostering trust and sustaining engagement rather than exploiting vulnerabilities. Natasha Shoes in Addiction by Design critically examines the darker aspects of strategic manipulation, particularly in gambling-like mechanics. Responsible designers increasingly rely on transparency, informed by ethical frameworks suggested by ethicists like Miguel Sicard, to foster trust between developers and players. Games employing transparent models, clear reward probabilities, predictable gameplay mechanics are examples of ethical strategic design informed by positive application of game theory. In the previous video, Psychology of Gaming, I talked about the dark patterns and manipulative design in game design, so I will not go into much detail in this video. However, if you want to see a detailed video about the ethical implications in game theory and design, please comment below and I can make a video in the future. Difficulty balancing vividly illustrates game theory principles in action. Roguelikes like Hades embody strategic equilibria, dynamically challenging players to adjust strategies with permadeath mechanics. Difficulty and strategic challenge directly correlate with player engagement, satisfaction, and persistence. Game theoretically, designers aim to create an equilibrium, optimal challenge levels where players consistently adapt but never abandon the game out of frustration. Games such as Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice provide compelling examples of strategic equilibrium. Players must continually reassess their strategies, weighing their skill improvement against punishing game mechanics. The result is a careful, theoretically informed equilibrium between frustration and accomplishment, exemplified by Jules' insight into relationship between failure, persistence, and satisfaction in gaming. Thus, difficulty design isn't arbitrary, it is a carefully calculated game theoretic decision enhancing long-term engagement and strategic depth. I have written my master's degree on punishment mechanics in video games with difficulty balancing players' behavior and how players perceive and react to them. In the future, I want to make another video about the difficulty balancing, punishment mechanics, and players' behavior, so don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to stay in the loop. Game theory makes a critical distinction between one-shot and iterative games, those played repeatedly over time. Video games, especially multiplayer titles, are fundamentally iterative, allowing strategies to evolve far beyond what designers originally anticipated. As players repeat games, they develop increasingly sophisticated strategies. Game theorist Martin Schubig's work on super games suggests that repeated play allows for evolutionary strategies that would be irrational in a single iteration. This explains why competitive game metas evolve even without developer intervention. Communities often develop unwritten rules and conventions through repeated play. Sociologist T. L. Taylor's research on MMO communities shows how player create norms emerge to solve coordination problems the game mechanics don't explicitly address. From don't spawn camp in first-person shooters to elaborate raiding etiquette in MMOs, these emergent norms represent collective solutions to game theory problems. Most fascinatingly, developers and players engage in metagame theory. Designer Eric Zimmerman describes this as iterative design, where developers respond to players' strategies, players adapt to those changes, and the cycle continues. This creates an ongoing conversation that keeps games like League of Legends engaging for years despite using the same basic map. Game theory gives us powerful tools for understanding why games work the way they do, and why we play them the way we do. From the zero-sum tensions of fighting games to complex prisoner's dilemmas of social deduction titles, mathematical models of strategic interaction shape our gaming experiences profoundly. Understanding game theory principles for developers means creating more engaging and balanced experiences. For players, it means recognizing the strategic patterns that underlie our favorite games and perhaps gaining an edge in competition. But most importantly, game theory reveals something fundamental about games themselves. They aren't just entertainment, they are sophisticated systems that engage our strategic thinking, social reasoning, and decision-making in ways few others media can. As game theory inspires game development, its relevance in design education, user experience, and ethical practice will only grow in scope, depth, and significance. The fusion of game theory with game design remains a dynamic, exciting frontier shaping the future of gaming in ways limited only by creativity and innovation. Next time you make a critical decision in a game, whether to trust another player, which character to select, or how to allocate resources, remember that you are participating in scenarios mathematicians have been studying for decades. Your intuitive understanding of these dynamics might be more sophisticated than you realize.